Well, welcome to the January 7th meeting of 2020, the first council meeting of the newly seated council members. We're glad you're here, and let's start with a roll call.
Thank you. Good evening, council. Before we get started, tonight we have you seated according to your council positions, beginning with position 1 here to the audience's left, and continuing on down the dais. Traditionally, we have the mayor sit in the center with the deputy mayor sitting to his or her left. After you have elected the mayor and deputy mayor, feel free to rearrange yourselves as you feel appropriate. And for roll call, Councilmember Carr. Here. Councilmember Dexter.
Here.
Councilmember French.
Here.
Councilmember McCon.
Here.
Councilmember Meyer.
Present.
Councilmember Sherman Warren.
I'm not last anymore.
Councilmember Suggs. Here. Manager West.
Present.
Attorney Bloor.
Here.
Thank you. Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're going to start tonight with some ceremonial matters. The first one I want to introduce by saying that I feel like Port Angeles has a really outstanding police department, and I'm grateful for their service. And we have the privilege tonight of being able to participate in the what's the word I'm looking for? My mind has just drawn a blank. We'll have a ceremony for the awarding of some life-saving awards for a couple of our police departments. So Chief Smith, if you'll meet me in the front, and all of you in the back, come up. No? No, sorry.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor and Council. Officer Eric Walker and Officer Kyle Cooper, please come down. So tonight we've got some life-saving awards, and we love talking about our officers and the things they do. We're very proud of all of them. And before we start, I'm going to just a quick introduction. On my right is Officer Kyle Cooper. He's been with the Port Angeles Police Department for over 6.5 years. He's a patrol shift supervisor, a defensive tactics field instructor, a taser and special munitions instructor, a police explorer advisor, and a field training officer, and I may have left some other things out as well. To his right is Officer Eric Walker. He's been with the PAPD for 3 years. He's a public housing resource officer, taser instructor, scope rifle marksman, and a trained crisis negotiator. Now, Officer Walker came to us from the Spokane Police Department. Officer Cooper came to us from the Yakima Police Department. Very fortunate to get both of them from other agencies. So we have some life-saving medals. I'm going to read the first one. So this starts on the afternoon of November 9th, 2019. Officer Kyle Cooper and Officer Eric Walker are dispatched a report of a suicidal woman in a house in Port Angeles. As they're responding, additional information they're given is that this is a woman who suffers from depression, has reportedly used alcohol and some antidepressants, and possibly has overdosed, and her life's in danger. Officers arrive and receive no answer at the door, can see nobody through the window, don't receive an answer on her phone, and so based on the exigent circumstances, they're forced to break the front door down in an effort to save her life. During the search of the house, they were also forced to kick in another locked bedroom door, and in that room, in the master bathroom, they find the victim, fully clothed, up to her chin in bathwater, unresponsive, and with a box cutter next to her. The officers immediately attempted to revive her, began resuscitation, and eventually turned her over to Port Angeles Fire Department paramedics. So due to the professional, aggressive, courageous, and compassionate actions of Officer Kyle Cooper and Officer Eric Walker, a human life was saved, and they're hereby awarded the life-saving medal.
Good evening. I have more good things to say about Officer Eric Walker. This is a second life-saving medal. On the evening of November 25th, 2019, Officer Eric Walker responded to a report of a suicidal young woman near the west end of 10th Street, known as the End of the World. She was threatening to run off the cliff and was armed with a handgun. Officer Walker initiated dialogue with her while she was sitting with both legs over the edge of the cliff. After about 5 minutes of negotiation, Officer Walker convinced her to leave the concealed pistol in her jacket and toss the jacket to officers. She did so, but slipped further over the edge. Finally, Officer Walker convinced her to crawl back from the edge so that she could be taken into custody for evaluation without further incident. Because of the skillful, calm, patient, courageous, and compassionate actions of Officer Walker, the human life was saved. For this, Officer Walker is awarded the life-saving medal. I want to say a couple more things about Officer Walker while I have the mic. Normally, we give about 50 medals away a year at a quiet ceremony with mostly members of the police department and a few others. And we don't do this always at City Council, but sometimes we do, and this time we are, because Officer Walker is going to miss our medal ceremony later this year. The reason he's going to miss that ceremony is because Officer Walker is also a captain in the United States Army. He's deploying, like now, for the Middle East, and we're going to miss him. Godspeed, brother.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you both again, and thank you for the other officers coming to support them. Our next order of business is elections of mayor and deputy mayor. And I just wanted to articulate the process before we get started so everyone knows what to expect. And Attorney Bloor, if I fumble anything, please correct me before we move forward. We will proceed in the order of mayor and then deputy mayor, and I will accept nominations. We'll open the nominations for mayor. Once all nominations have been made, we will close the nominations, and then we will vote on the nominees in the order in which the nominations were made. I suspect that it's a wise decision to ensure that the person you're nominating is willing to accept the nomination before we vote, so that will be part of that process. So the first, if we have multiple nominees for a particular position, the first nominee to receive a majority vote will be the winner of that race. Am I articulating that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, very good, thank you.
And in addition, the nominations do not require a second.
Correct.
Just for procedural.
Right, from a procedural standpoint, a nomination does not require a second. And if we end up with a tie, we will go through the process again, and we will go through the list again and vote again. And if we still end up in a tie, then we have prepared ranked choice voting ballots for us to use. So with that, I will open the nominations for mayor.
2 years ago, we went through this process, And I found it, I don't know, not a little disappointing and upsetting that our nominations had almost no public debate. And so coming into this year, when we had a new council, I made a concerted effort to not do a lot of discussion, before this meeting on what nominations would be. We had people always ask, who do you think the next mayor is going to be and all those things, but I really thought it was appropriate that we have the conversations, because I think that there's a lot of different ways that we could go that would be perfectly appropriate. What I didn't want to have was, some appearance that the vote was already set or anything like that. So when I saw the presentation earlier, when they talked about the different qualities that we would want in a chair, I, felt that the person I was going to nominate fit every single one of those 6 qualities. And so I'm going to nominate Kate Dexter to be mayor. And then I'm going to be extremely open-minded as far as other nominations for mayor or deputy mayor. But I think that Kate has shown over the last 2 years as being deputy mayor that she knows how to run a meeting, that she can make tough decisions in very difficult circumstances. And I'm completely convinced that she'll be a fantastic leader for our council.
Thank you very much. I will accept the nomination, and it would be a privilege to serve as mayor if I am elected. Are there any other nominations?
I just want to say I agree with Mr. French, so thank you.
I'll just do one more call for any other nominations. All right. So I will close the nominations for mayor, and I will ask all those in favor of myself, Kate Dexter, for mayor of the city of Port Angeles, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Well, thank you very much. I am humbled, and it will be my honor and privilege to serve as your mayor. So, thank you. Allow it for a moment. Thank you. All right, moving on to deputy mayor. I will open the nominations for deputy mayor.
Well, I would like to nominate Mr. French.
All right.
In that case, I'm going to nominate Navarra Carr.
So,
And I'm going to speak to my nominations just first. I do appreciate the nomination, and if people want me to do it, I would do it. But I do think that there's a good discussion point here of, when we were on 2 years ago, we nominated a mayor and then a deputy mayor. One of the choices that we made, was to nominate one of the new people to be deputy mayor, so that there could be a position that could be one, of education for newer members that didn't have all the, experience of people that have been on the council for, in our case, it was longer terms. And so I do think that there is some value in having a mix in our leadership among people, someone who has had a couple years of experience and then someone who is one of the new. We have a new council that has a majority of new members. I think that it's perfectly appropriate for the new members to have input.
so are you accepting your nomination?
I wasn't gonna, I'm not gonna turn it down. I don't I don't know why this is what it is, but
Navarra,
I
would you-
appreciate it.
Yes, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Navarra, would you accept a nomination?
Thank you, Mike, and I will also accept the nomination.
Are there any other nominations?
Is it uncouth to nominate myself for deputy mayor? Okay,
There's no rule?
then I nominate myself.
And make your case.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm very, one of the big tenets of why I ran was communication with the public and getting out there and meeting people. And over these 4 years, I think one of the big things is getting public outreach and getting people to come and be involved and be educated in what's going on in the city. And that's why I have this time in my life right now to devote to this. And like you said, having somebody who's established, like Kate, be the mayor, I've watched for, half a year up here, I think is important to have a deputy mayor being somebody new to sort of pass the torch as we continue down this road.
Okay, any other nominations? Have I guess I don't need to ask you if you'll accept your own nomination. All right, so I will close the nominations, and we will just do a, I'm going to make myself a list here. All right, so we will start with a vote. All those in favor of Mike French for Deputy Mayor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those in favor of Navarra Carr for Deputy Mayor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Can we see a show of hands on that?
Yeah. Okay, so we have a winner in Navarra Carr as the Deputy Mayor because that was the majority vote.
I was planning on voting yes for you too, Brendan. What? I was planning on voting yes for you too.
Yes, in this case, but anyway. All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you for nominating yourself. All right, and now, because it's a big day and there's lots to celebrate, we have some cookies and coffee in the back, so we're gonna let's just do a 10-minute break if we can. We'll aim for 10. Okay, how about 11? We'll come back at 6:30 and restart our meeting. We'll start with public comment. So we will move on to public comment. Do we have anyone sign up? There's a lot going on tonight.
I'd like to speak. I didn't sign up.
Right, let's just.
I did. I signed up.
Thank you. All right, so there will be plenty of time for you to speak. First person signed up is Doc Robinson.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
And as a reminder, for people who are speaking, we ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and that you state your name and whether or not you live in the city of Port Angeles for the record. We do not need an address. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Doc Robinson, and I do live in Port Angeles. I want to speak for just a second on you're going to be considering the legislative agenda of Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, and I want to speak in favor of your supporting it. I'll just touch on one point. So in this state, we have had a long time policy that 30% of all money spent by the Housing Trust Fund is reserved for rural housing development. And over time, that percentage has been encroached on by segmenting regular spending from other categories of spending. And part of the agenda is to bring it all back to zero and say all of it counts and 30% is reserved for rural spending. And I think this is very important for us because if we have to compete with urban proposals, it's just not possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And next on the list is Norma Turner.
Good evening. My name is Norma Turner, and I live within 5 acres of the city limits, but I'm actually not in the city limits. And I want to welcome all the new council members. This is delightful seeing younger faces. I'm used to a lot of gray hair. But yours is okay. I am on with the Boys and Girls Club. I'm the co-chair of the capital campaign and serve on the board, and I'm also on the PA unit council. So what I wanted to do is just give you a couple minutes update and familiarize you with the Boys and Girls Club, what it is, and what's happening with it right now. So since 2016, the City of Port Angeles has kindly sent in 3 letters of recommendations about the Boys and Girls Club. So I brought those letters for you, so some of you are new in the council, you can figure out what has been formally said, and I'll hand those out at the end here. And we appreciate the comments. So basically, one of the big comments that we really appreciate is that the Boys and Girls Club is seen as an essential part of your economic development plan, and indeed we are. And I'll get into why that's true. But a background is that we serve children between ages 6 and 18. The teenagers have to be in school in order to attend the Boys and Girls Club, and once they drop out, they're not able to come to our facility. and we provide safe and meaningful after-school care. And what this does, the reason why it's economic development, it allows both parents to go to work, knowing that their children are in a safe place. And we provide the service at an incredibly low rate of $30 a year. You might wonder why we don't make it more. And it's because it's consistent with our national policy of making it low enough that everybody can afford to come. And research has shown that after the school hours are really high risk for kids to get involved in untoward activities and sometimes teen pregnancy. So basically, having a solid after-school place for kids to go that's safe is a prevention program. The local child care crisis committee, I don't know if you knew there is one, but I asked if they'd come talk to you next week, that we have a statewide problem which is reflected also locally here in child care. 50% of parents in the state report that they cannot find child care. The impact on employers is over $2 billion when these parents arrive work late, or they leave early, or there's turnover, or they can't accept a new position because of child care issues. It truly is a community critical issue that I hope we'll all look at very closely. We know firsthand that about how this happens. The city a few years ago decided they were in a budget crunch, and therefore they discontinued their after-school program at Parks and Rec. Immediately, our membership went up by 20%, and so the nonprofits picked up that gap that was there. So I hope maybe, oh, is that 3 minutes already? Okay, I'm going to give you a quick synopsis here. Just let you know that we have 135 kids a day that come to our facility. We have 209 on the wait list who would like to come, but we don't have room. Our new facility is going vertical. I invite you to come by and see it on Francis and Boulevard. We're hoping you'll help us to go to DOE because we ran into a minor problem worth about $200,000 of unidentified fuel tanks. Our capital campaign is moving forward. The total is $8.2 million. We now need about $800,000 more, and we have over 400 individual donors. So we've been working really hard to get to where we are. So we look forward to having a chance maybe that we could all meet and explain to you more about what we do and to follow up on these wonderful words that are in these letters of endorsement as to how we can translate that into a real meaningful partnership. So thank you, and I'll hand out the packets. And I went over 1 whole minute.
Okay, thank you. I think it was important for us to hear that, so I appreciate it.
Okay, so here's your packets.
And if you have an extra to give to Carrie for the record, if you have an extra that you can give to the clerk for the record, that would be great. And if you're one short, you can give her mine. Oh, can I have it?
Okay, I'll take yours then.
That sounds great. Okay. All right, and I know, Ed, Chad, you wanted to speak. Anyone else would like to, feel free to line up. Or wait until he's done and then come up.
Okay, either way. Good evening. My name's Ed Chad. I live in Port Angeles, and welcome to the new council members. Thank you all. Welcome to the returning council members. Thank you all. And you look like a good group. We could be in for a good run. I'm here to talk about a particular legislative priority I'd like to suggest that I think is both a no-brainer and has very little fiscal impact. I note that in the background that City Manager West provided, item number 1 of considerations is keep asks of the legislature non-monetary items or smaller financial requests. And then I note that among all the requests, they're pretty much all financial. So anyway, this one's a non-financial one, and it has to do with ranked choice voting. New council members probably know that in December, the last council discussed the possibility of endorsing to the state a ranked choice voting measure that's before the state legislature. It's HB 1722, and I'd like to reinforce a request to you all to consider passing that along to the state legislature. What the bill would do would be to allow places like Port Angeles to implement ranked choice voting procedures if they so desired. So it doesn't lock anybody into anything. I actually was touched by the idea that the council decided in its own little internal election process that it was going to use ranked choice voting. And really the reason is that it makes a lot of sense. Just to use an example from the city council, you have 3 or 4 positions that are open. In this city of all places, we really aren't such a big city that we have neighborhoods that have that many neighborhood interests. It's really a citywide kind of thing. And in fact, you all are running citywide. There's no requirement you be from A or B part. Well, I'd go to the ballot, and I've got 2 people running for one of the positions, and I like them both. And I got 2 people running for another position. I don't like either one of them. Guess what? I have to vote for one of each. Doesn't make any sense at all. And I really believe that in a larger sense, ranked choice voting is one of the solutions to the problem that we have of apathy and alienation. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much. All right, is there anyone else who would like to speak during this first public comment period? We do have a public comment period at the end of the meeting as well. All right, so seeing no one else, we will move on to late items. Are there any late items today?
Madam Mayor, we do not have any late items this evening, but we do have one item which we're pulling from the agenda this evening. That's item J1, and we'll be bringing that back to council at the January 21st meeting. We found some improvements that we need to make to that before it comes forward to council, so we're not going to ask council to consider that this evening.
Thank you. All right, so the consent agenda is the next item, and I will read the consent agenda, and then if anyone has anything that we need to pull, we will. The City Council minutes of December 3rd, 2019 and December 17th, 2019. Expenditure report from February 7th, 2019 and December 31st, 2019 in the amount of $5,348,459.03.
I move the consent agenda as read with the amendment that it was from December 7th to December 31st. You said February.
Sorry. Thank you. We have a second? Right. No one needs to pull anything, wouldn't imagine, from this one. Okay. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda as read?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
That's 1 no. Okay. Now we're moving on to other considerations. The first one, I1, is the City Action Days hosted by AWC, that's the Association of Washington Cities, is coming up on the 28th and 29th of January. And we need to decide which 3 of us will be going to that. It would be helpful to decide that tonight so that we can register. I would be interested in going as the mayor, so I'm just going to throw that out there while I have the floor. But I just wanted to then just go down and if you are interested in going, please say so.
I'm definitely interested in attending.
I am very definitely interested as well.
I think it sounds like a lovely opportunity, but I'm absolutely fine sitting this one out.
Okay. Yes, and I meant to say also that there's also the annual conference in the summer, and so we do try to kind of balance who's gone to one thing before, and then who might have the opportunity to go to the next one, so keep that in mind as well. Anyone on this end?
I'm a no just for scheduling issues.
Okay.
I can wait this one out and maybe go to another one. I have a conflict.
Okay, great.
I would certainly go, but I think I'm bottom of the list since I've been to this twice before. But to put me as an alternate, if such a thing exists, because I think it should be 2 new council members in there, that's going to be great.
All right, so right now we have Brendan, Charlie, and myself. Do we need a motion for that?
You do not.
Okay. All right. So, so the three of us will go with Nathan, and we will work out the travel and lodging at a later date. All right. Now on to legislative priorities, which I hope will be a lively discussion. Nathan, do you want to take that one?
I'd be happy to. Madam Mayor and Council, tonight we have brought back the legislative priorities that were discussed at the Council's December 17th meeting. It was really important to bring those discussion points back so that the new Council had an opportunity to weigh in before we finalize a legislative briefing paper to take with us to Olympia for those city action days. At the last meeting on December 17th, approximately 6 items were suggested for moving forward. There was no official action taken on those 6 items, but ultimately there were 6 items suggested for moving forward. The 6 items included thanking the legislators for their assistance during 2019 on key housing initiatives that they put forward. The second item was maintain housing as a priority, as well as incorporate support of the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance priority list for the legislature. And the next was the Association of Washington Cities priorities, supporting those, followed by support of the Chamber of Commerce Renaissance, which incorporates the city's waterfront project phase 3. And then the next item on the list was ensure full funding in support of the Port Angeles Waterfront Center and the Port Angeles Boys and Girls Club, both which I believe have pending requests in the legislature. I believe for Port Angeles Waterfront Center, they have $2 million pending. I believe for Boys and Girls Club, though they may correct me, they have at least $760,000 pending request in the legislature right now. And then finally, support of the Clallam Transit funding needs based on the potential loss of I-976.
All right, thank you very much. Before I turn it over to council, I just wanted to take a quick minute to say, if we decide that we want to, narrow that down a little bit, I was the one who brought up the Clallam Transit funding, and I actually feel like, given that it's sort of 976 is in court battle right now, for lack of a better word, that it probably isn't necessarily appropriate to have it on for this legislative session, because they're not going to be making any decisions while they're waiting to hear what the court decides. So I would be okay with striking that, just mentioning that now for the point of discussion. Right. Is there any discussion? Surely there must be. Oh, and just a quick note for those of you who, I think you all went to the, most of you have had some training, but as a general rule, by our procedures, if you've already spoken on a topic, you don't get another chance to speak on a topic until everyone else has had an opportunity to speak. So just throw that out there as we're starting a discussion. Right. So Charlie?
I like the list a lot. It's, I did mention, I think I mentioned something to Nathan the other day. I didn't know, I'm very new at this, obviously, but can Ranier cleanup site be a part of this list? Or?
I don't know. Thoughts on that?
It certainly could be a priority if that's what council chooses to prioritize. There's a number of components of that project that the city's been involved with, engaged with, and some updates still due to the new council members on that subject. But certainly if that's something that the majority of council wants to put forward as a legislative priority, that could be done. And just important to recognize the value of keeping the list to a minimum this year, considering a short legislative session.
Thank you. All right.
Well, just to continue that discussion, Charlie, I mean, were you thinking of just letters support to get the work done, or is this a funding request that you were thinking of, or just a letter of support? There's so much going on with the Port Angeles cleanup harbor that there's multiple stakeholders working on that, and the State Department of Ecology. So I guess I'm asking just kind of more for your feedback of what you were thinking as a priority for a legislative ask on that.
Pressure.
If I could jump in, I do think that there could be value in just having a conversation with our legislators to let them know that, we had a action that was, that we sent a letter back opposing as a city. And so just to make sure that they're fully informed of what our position is on the cleanup proposal, I think that would have value, and it probably wouldn't take up too much of our time away from, actual legislative priorities.
Right, I do think, just a clarification on that, contextually, while we're there, we will meet with our representatives, so I think there's certainly the opportunity for some conversation. We want to focus primarily on what we decide on our legislative priorities, but there's also an opportunity to say, oh, and by the way, don't forget we have this outstanding letter with Rainier. So also just for procedural purposes, generally, if you just raise your hand, then I call on you, and then you speak, and then we don't end up with multiple people speaking. And I realize it's much harder sitting in this seat to like left and right, left and right. So bear with me, as I've done this before, but somehow it feels different tonight. So just a little extra pressure. So we'll do our best. But all right. So who else would like to speak to this? All right, Navarra.
I also think, Charlie, that that's a really good point, that we have a project that affects the quality of life here in the city of Port Angeles for the people, as well as our environment and tourism, and that having that as a priority that gets done in a timely fashion, I think is really important. And being able to talk to our legislators and let them know that our city council is asking them to, and the state to really put their work into this project. I think that is important.
Lindsay?
So I agree with the mayor on the context here. This is sitting down or providing a hopefully one-page sheet to our legislators, who may pass it on to others, who knows, about bills before them in this legislative session. And that's what they're focused on now. If it's not something to do with this legislative session, I don't think it makes sense putting it in our legislative priorities. And that's not to say that the Rainier cleanup isn't important. I think it is a strong priority. But if it's not related to a bill or some funding item, to the extent that that's actually going to be discussed in a non-budget year, I don't think it makes sense to put it in. Otherwise, I generally agree with this list, and I would make a pitch as well to reconsider the bill supporting the choice of ranked choice voting. I brought that to the council after attending a local event, attended by probably about 30 people here in Port Angeles, about that bill and kind of what it would do and the process. And I pushed that forward perhaps too quickly, because I wanted to make sure that we had that in hand to be able to affect the legislative session. And this is time sensitive. That's why we're discussing this now at the very first meeting. And it's like, welcome to the city council, and now you lobby your state legislators. But they have bills before them, and if it's not related to a bill or something that they're going to care about in the next 3 months, I don't think it should be on our list, even though it's important.
All right, thank you. Brendan?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Lindsay said. I think you're right. Although Rainier is a super important site, and God knows I live down the block from it, and I'd love to see something happen to it. It's like you said, Lindsay. We just keep it short, and there's a lot of other avenues that we still have to explore with Rainier. And yeah, this looks good.
Yes.
If I could just get a reminder and I know that we talked about it, but what was again, the ask with the Chamber of Commerce Renaissance Waterfront Phase 3 request as presented to council? Was that a financial ask or for that?
I was actually going to ask for clarification on that as well. So Nathan, would you be willing to answer that question?
Yeah, I will do my best, but it's a little bit elusive, and I think what we sent out to all of council that council has received in a public meeting before was a presentation provided by the Chamber of Commerce and a packet that ultimately indicated a number of dollar values for the complete renaissance that they anticipate taking place in the downtown. It did have specific numbers for the waterfront project. I believe approximately 20 million was the ask for the waterfront project itself. I think the intent of the Chamber of Commerce, not to speak for them, but I think one of their goals was to push this both at the federal level and the state level. And I certainly think that if council wanted to pin down a dollar amount for that, less than 20 million, I think you would be just fine doing that if that's what you chose to do. But ultimately it's an approximate 20 million figure, knowing that there's multiple projects taking place in the downtown area, all of which the Chamber wanted to see be part of the Renaissance.
So essentially, it is the council, I mean, we know this is in the RFP, but also it's the council saying we are on board with what the Chamber is doing. We're looking forward to this as well, and we're hoping that you will consider funding it as we move forward.
And the Chamber made specific presentations to all of our legislators about this already, and they also did it to our federal legislators. So I think that could be a verbal update, much like Rainier, where we say, you know, there's not a bill, there's not necessarily a funding ask right now today, but these are projects that matter to us that are going to keep coming back, and we're going to keep mentioning them to you and you know, it's more of a long-term process that I think would be beneficial to have just a conversation with, to say, we know that the Chamber of Commerce talked to you about this. We would love to hear, you know, for you to take them seriously, because these projects do matter.
Before we go back to Lindsay or Brendan, Charlie, you're going to Lindsay.
So I'm wondering if we could combine the Port Angeles Waterfront Center, which it sounds like has a specific funding request that the legislature is considering, with the larger, the Renaissance and Waterfront project, and maybe point out in our legislative priority sheet that the Field Center, the Waterfront Center, is part of a larger downtown waterfront renaissance. And because otherwise I'm agreeing with what I think other council members might be saying of where's the ask in the Renaissance thing that affects this legislative session.
Council, I apologize for interrupting, but I will say I did grab the Chamber of Commerce document. It is a specific ask in the Chamber of Commerce document for Waterfront Phase 3 of $20 million towards infrastructure.
Can I ask a point of clarification? Is that already something that the legislature is considering? Is that something new? Like, where is that? Because we're in a continuing legislative, I mean, it's kind of like a continuation of last year's legislative session.
It would be a brand new consideration for the legislature, with the exception of, I'm aware that the Chamber has had meetings with our local legislators to discuss that item. So it would be a new ask in a time when we know the budget adjustments are probably going to be very minimal, and I think it's important to respect that. But I also agree with you, Councilmember Sherman Warren, that I think there's an opportunity to do some combining there relative to the Renaissance and the other downtown project that's been mentioned.
Thank you. Brendan.
Yeah, I was actually going to suggest that, like, why can't we just roll the two into one?
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to speak again quickly. So I like that idea. I do kind of, I guess I'm concerned that both the Waterfront Center and I read that as the campus, not just Field Hall, and the Boys and Girls Club have current asks that we are hoping are funded. And so I just want to be careful that we don't, I think from a topic standpoint, it makes sense to roll the Waterfront Center into that Chamber of Commerce bullet point, but I want to be sure that that doesn't somehow, like, here are two things that are happening that matter right now that we want to see completed, we want them to get their money, and so we're saying we're supporting those. And we also support the Chamber for the bigger downtown project, but I don't want the Waterfront Center ask that's already pending to get lost in the bigger ask of the Chamber. So that's I can probably go either way on that, but I definitely want to make sure that whether it's a standalone or stays the way it is, that the Boys and Girls Club stays on the list. So I don't, no one's suggesting that it wouldn't, but just in terms of how we organize it. So also just as a, just to get a feel. So the only point that we're that's currently up for discussion, everyone's okay with everything except discussing how we go forward with the Renaissance and the Waterfront Center. Yes?
Did you also want to drop the support for the transit?
I'm suggesting we do that just because I think the timing is wrong. So yes, I would like to drop it. Mike?
So should I formalize this into a motion? Because
Yeah,
it feels
let's
like,
do
okay.
that.
So I move that we adopt the legislative priorities of the thank you for the legislative assistance in 2019, including House Bill 1406, 1923, and others, resulting in our passage of Proposition 1. Incorporating the AWC, supporting the AWC priorities, supporting, maintaining housing as the #1 focal point of city priorities, considering some or all of the and incorporating the legislative priorities of the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. And then ensuring full funding in support of the Port Angeles Waterfront Center and Port Angeles Boys and Girls Club. And then I would also add that so that would be the one sheet. And then I would add that we direct the city manager to add a verbal, some amount of verbal conversation about the Chamber of Commerce Renaissance and the Rainier cleanup action that we have a letter pending to ecology with.
Is there a second?
I second the motion.
All right. Okay, so further discussion. Is there any further discussion?
I think we should discuss the Housing Alliance priorities to make sure that, those are comfortable with us.
Okay, so those are on page I-7 in the packet.
The ones that I would highlight are the first one, investing $10 million into the Housing Trust Fund for reservation of affordable homes. As I mentioned with passing Proposition 1, making sure the Housing Trust Fund is fully functional from the state level would matter for whether or not we would be able to get matching funds for our local sales tax. And then the other one, as Dr. Robinson mentioned earlier, was, where did it go? Ensuring the Housing Trust Fund's geographic distributions are met for rural housing. So those are two that I would highlight. But I honestly don't have a problem with any of the other ones.
If we were going to maybe rearrange them with a little bit of priority for Port Angeles, I would also like to see the bullet point enacting a state level prohibition on rent gouging. Because we have heard from constituents that their rent has gone up so significantly in such a short amount of time without enough notice that they can't possibly afford it, and therefore they become homeless, which is the opposite of what we want to have happening when people are currently housed. So just a suggestion, if we want to reorganize these in any way, or if we just want to say we appreciate all of them, I'm happy to quickly number them, and we could then say we support all of them with a priority on number 1.
Madam Mayor, I believe there's
Yep.
14 total, if that helps.
Okay. So I'm thinking number 7 and number 9 are the 3 that have been recommended as being potentially slightly higher priority than the others from the city of Port Angeles standpoint. Does that make sense to anyone, or should we just, people feel like we should just?
I like that.
Yes, Latricia?
I guess I have a question. I mean, when you support another person's activities or another entity's activities, is it proper to kind of reprioritize their activities according to our local? I mean, is it really, I don't know. I guess I've never done that when I've gone in the past. So this is kind of new to me, thinking about reprioritizing. And if we were going to do that, the other one that I liked was on page I-7, was which you might have already highlighted, was the third, requiring maybe a move-in installment. I mean, because when you think about first, last deposits, and that's a lot of money for a person to shell out at one time. And if they had the option to do that, I think that's a great option. But I don't know, I guess what is our thoughts on reprioritizing?
Before Mike, let me, yes.
I don't think it's necessarily reprioritizing this because none of them have priorities on them. It's presented as a list that everything is equal. There's no ranking. And I think for our city to say these ones are the most pertinent to our city, and if only a few of them were to be passed, these would be the ones that would affect us the most. And I think that is very helpful, and I would imagine it would be helpful to our representatives so that they really understand what are our priorities as our city, and that we've given this a great deal of thought and consideration rather than just taking something that, even if it's so well put together, that someone else has put forth, that we've really considered it for our area.
Charlie, were you going to speak or getting your water?
No, that's fine. I agree with the list, and I do like what you put in about the rent gouging. I think that's something that should be looked at.
So maybe rather than reorganizing the document, we could put some kind of highlight on it for them, just to highlight these are the four that were brought up specifically by council. If they can't all happen. I mean, some of them I think are, if this happens and this happens, then we get a lot further than if only this one. But if they can't all happen, having some note of for us, these are the ones that we really wish would happen.
That's not a motion or anything that you've done there.
No, it's not. It's just a conversation.
Okay.
Within the discussion period of a motion on the table.
So I would like us to separate the Waterfront Center and the Renaissance from the Boys and Girls Club. I'd like those to be separate items when we actually do it. And I'm realizing that that comment is more about the formatting and layout than about what is actually on the page. So I'm thinking that maybe after we decide what's on the page, we should have a small temporary committee of the council work with the city manager's office on the details, given that this needs to be ready within the month.
And my motion had 4, bullet points. It's fairly easy to just separate them to 5. That still is concise.
And I agree, we're saying this is the content. So maybe that subcommittee can work on that housing alliance piece, since that's not a part of the current motion and would be potentially a whole separate motion. But we've had a conversation about it, so people are aware. So is there any further discussion on the legislative priorities?
I move to amend the proposal to include reference to the Renaissance waterfront within the text of the page, not just a verbal comment.
Second. Is that how this works? We haven't done the parliamentary training.
We haven't been doing our amendments properly either, so we're doing it different than we've done in the last 2 years, but this is right.
Okay, so is there any discussion on the amendment, which is to actually have the Chamber of Commerce request as one of our bullet points and not as a verbal?
Incorporated in the waterfront center.
Incorporated in
text.
into the page.
I'm sorry, why are we going back to not making this verbal? Was there a reason?
Yeah, I think this piece of paper could be used in multiple ways outside of just the meetings we have with our representatives, who honestly don't really look at the piece of paper during the meeting anyway. So I think having reference to the Renaissance and waterfront on the paper. So for example, it could say, ensure full funding in support of the Port Angeles Waterfront Center, comma, which is part of the larger Renaissance and Waterfront Phase 3 project. Something to actually make it there on paper so that it's not just conveyed in 3 small meetings with the representatives, but it's on our legislative priorities.
Yeah. But leave the Rainier part out and just keep that verbal. Is that what you think?
Yes, that's.
Yeah, that's not part of the proposed amendment, and I think I stated my reasons there.
Okay. Any further discussion on the amendment, which is simply moving that back onto the page? All right. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. And now we're back to discussion about the original motion we're now on to the discussion of the amended motion. Right. Is there any further discussion on that?
Should we also amend it to have Boys and Girls Club be their separate ask? Or does that matter?
I think I appreciate, so we can do this, and then based on Lindsay's recommendation that we perhaps form a small committee to work with the city manager to figure out the layout. I think that can be discussed then at that point. So let's deal with this, and then we'll go on to that one. Any further discussion on the amended motion? Right. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion passes unanimously. And then I would entertain a motion to form a subcommittee to work with city manager.
I move that the council form a committee composed of Mayor Dexter, Councilmember, and I can't pronounce your last name yet, Charlie, and Councilmember Meyer, to work with the city manager's office on layout and formatting of the city's legislative priorities.
Does that work for both of you?
Depending on my work schedule, and depending on when we actually get together and meet.
And we might be able to do some of this via email as well. So if you're both willing to do that, I would be as well. So any discussion on that motion?
That hasn't been seconded.
Oh, sorry.
A second the motion.
Mike?
Is there a reason this couldn't just be the whole council on the next packet, or does it have to be done before then? It has to be done.
We should approve it at the next, we should approve the document at the next meeting.
Gotcha.
We won't have
Okay.
another meeting before the, before the event, for the meeting. All right, so if there's no discussion on that, all those in favor of forming the subcommittee, as stated, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, next item. The next item is the Port Angeles Municipal Code RFQ and...
Madam Mayor, sorry, I apologize. I just want to make sure we've got it correct for the record. Did we get incorporated in that motion? I apologize if we did. Incorporated in the motion the housing specifics where there was a discussion of the breakdown, looking at items, sorry, bear with me, items 1, 3, 7, and 9 were specific.
Motion.
It was not.
Okay,
No.
thank you for that clarification.
Okay, so the next item is the municipal code RFQ, and there is a new and correct, there are two on the dais in front of us. One is the change tracker, so we can see what's different from what's in our packet to the final document that is the one that doesn't have the lines. So who would like to address that?
Madam Mayor and Council, I'll start that item off. As all of you are aware, there have been a number of discussions about the importance of updating the City of Port Angeles Municipal Code, and all but one council member had the opportunity to participate in a recent work session where we provided some input as some different opportunities or alternatives to how we might move forward with making changes to the municipal code. Ultimately, what council suggested we move forward with was a hybrid approach. And what you have before you is a staff drafted request for qualifications that enables us to move that process forward. It incorporates the suggestions from that council work session, but it also incorporates all of the elements that we think are essential to really consider and ensure we have an adequate public process, adequate council involvement in the drafting of a new Port Angeles Municipal Code or respective sections of that code. So staff put a lot of time into drafting this request for qualifications. I do apologize with the last minute changes. We did get a number of really great input comments from different staff members, and what you see is the latest version as we still continue to receive some of those comments into the process. And so before you, again, you do have a red line version that changes some of the lines. Majority of them were probably redundant points in the request for qualifications, but I'll turn it over to Attorney Bloor, who can highlight some additional elements of the request for qualifications.
Particularly for the new council members, during the earlier presentation tonight, I referred to one additional topic that we wanted to cover in the future, and that deals with contracting. So it is plain and clear that the city council is the only entity in the city that can approve a contract. But contracts come to you through different procedural processes. Some of those processes happen before the contract itself ever reaches your desk. In this case, you are seeing the earlier stages of a contract formation. In this case, you're looking at the potential terms that would be subject to a contract. This would be a services contract. In this case, the contract price and the contract terms ultimately would be subject to further negotiation, but what you're looking at would be the basic foundation for establishing a contract. Now, I'm saying this because different contracts will come to you in different ways. A construction contract will come through an entirely different process, and you would see it at the end of the process. A contract for engineering services has its own process, which is different than this. This is a service contract. Engineering services are obviously services, but they go through a different contracting process. And contracts for the purchase of materials go through a different set of criteria, which can result in several different processes. So again, what you're seeing is, and what is coming to you for review tonight, is the foundation for how we would proceed with an audit of the municipal code. And this foundation would be set by you, and this is the first step toward getting a report on our municipal code that would ultimately lead to a rewrite. This would be the foundation for negotiation with a consultant who would perform the services. It also sets out the services in some detail. So I think I just wanted to give you that explanation about what this is, where it would lead, and how it might differ from other contracting procedures.
Thank you. So this doesn't require a motion, but certainly if we want to have some, people have questions or comments about it, now would be a good time to raise those. So, Lindsay?
So just as a point of information, I'm curious about page 2, the last new line in the red line version, which includes in the scope of work, compare city policies to the Port Angeles Municipal Code to ensure consistency. I'm curious about the difference between city policies and the Port Angeles Municipal Code, where the policies come from, and why they're not in the municipal code, and what role council has in the city policies.
Yeah, most of the, so there are a number of city policies that the council approves, but they're not codified. One example, an easy example, would be the financial policies. During the budget process, staff relies a lot on those financial policies because they are direction from council, but they're not codified and they're not code. But they are very important, and we treat them as being explicit directions from council on those issues. And so that would be an area where over the years we have accumulated lots of policies on different things. And I think it would be helpful, or I guess one of the ideas that it would be helpful not only to look at what is in code and codified, but also compare that to policies where there's a chance that if we adopt new code provisions, we may have to go back and then revise policies that were once corrected, once complied with our code, maybe no longer would. That's the idea. Is that?
Okay, Mike?
Can I just point out that it actually says compare city polices to the PAMC to ensure consistency, so there's a small typo.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else have questions or comments?
Well, I'll follow up with that, and I really appreciate the explanation by the city attorney. I think it's important for, we have policies that might be internal and then policies that potentially are external and face the public. And I think it's important for our code to be the one-stop shop for people who are trying to understand what rules they have to follow in the city, to be able to go to the code and get all those rules, and not potentially then come to the city and find that there's another set of policies. So I agree with, we don't need to codify the financial policies, for example, but I want to make sure, especially as we talk about requests for qualifications, that includes a lot looking at our land use policies, that we make sure to include the city policies in the scope of work, because it's not just about the municipal code, it's about all those things that might affect people who are trying to do sustainable development in Port Angeles.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for bringing that and for giving us an opportunity to see it. I'm looking forward to seeing what we hear.
Just one more question before we move on.
Yeah.
Will this go out over the city's email, or how will this RFQ be distributed?
So it'll go out in a number of different ways. It'll go out through the city's website and distributed to the city's email list that's associated with the website. It'll also go to Peninsula Daily News, and it'll be circulated most likely to Seattle Daily Journal of Commerce, and if Attorney Bloor has an additional one that was planned, I may be forgetting one.
We'll probably also send it to PwC and also to the State Association of Municipal Attorneys too. And perhaps MRC as well. Well, probably MRC as well.
Thank you. Okay. Any last questions, comments? All right. So now we move on to council reports. And traditionally, or generally, council reports are so that people can report back, council members can report back what they're doing in their committee work. And of course, occasionally, if you did something exciting that you want other people to know about, or there's an event that you're a part of that you want everyone to know about, we have used the time to share that as well. So I know new people don't have, I think probably even returning council members haven't done any committee work necessarily since we last met, but I don't think it hurts to just take a moment to say hello and tell us again who you are. I know you guys are really, we've just done that a whole bunch recently, so don't give us your stump speech, but maybe something that you're excited about working on this year. So let's start to my right.
I am Latricia Suggs. I live in the city of Port Angeles. I'm also a Jamestown S'Klallam tribal citizen, and I'm really excited to be on the council. I've got, I have a lot of friends on the council here that I've established over the years. I'm almost a lifelong citizen in the city of Port Angeles. My great-grandmother was most likely born on the beach around here, and so I'm pretty excited. But I welcome all of the new faces, Navarra, Charlie, Brendan. Thank you, Lindsay, Kate, and Mike for your young years of being on the council prior to me coming on board. And I'm just excited to be here, and I hope to serve the city of Port Angeles with honor and respect during my time while I finish out the 2 years that remain in position 1. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I actually have an extensive council report. So today I attended, along with Lindsay was there, the Homelessness Task Force in Clallam County, and we have reappointed our chair, Mary Hogan, to another year. Not a lot was going on at that meeting. There's always good work that we could talk about. I will also say, I'm not sure if I mentioned this in my last council report, but we did pass the 1-year mark of the night that Nathan and I spent at the homeless shelter. And as part of the homelessness, the shelter, what do they call it? What did you guys call it? The homeless challenge? And that was quite an experience. Just this past Christmas Day, I had occasion to be at the homeless shelter for a short amount of time. And I will just say that the demand for services is far outstripped by what can be provided, and so there's still a lot of work to do. I'm, reflecting on that a year later, I feel like we've done a lot of work, and there's still so much more. I attended over the break the PA Chamber of Commerce board meeting. I should actually talk to the mayor about that afterwards, because they want to know before we do our appointments whether I'll be reappointed to that board, because they publish their board in a circular that goes out in the Peninsula Daily News. Anyway, we did announce some new board members on that board. One of the things that's really exciting about the Chamber board is that it is a very diverse board that's very integrated in our community, and that works very hard for the Chamber. So we added Sam Grillo, who manages the landing downtown. We added Josh Jones from the medical physicians. We added Danya Allward from Red Lion Hotel, Kayla Oakes from the Wanapika Foundation, Johanna Barty, which I think you probably know pretty well, and Julie Hatch. And so we have, a great batch of new board members coming on. Really excited about that. At the meeting, we also discussed a potential proposal to the city for the Chamber to conduct planning for the downtown business district, which at some point will probably come to this council. So that's something to look for that I'm pretty excited about. And then over the break, I attended a Clallam Transit meeting in Lindsay's stead. The really relevant things that happened, it was a good meeting, I felt. It's nice to see the executive director kind of come into his role, as he's not been there that long. We did hear public comment from Ryan Mullane from Blackball on the importance of the midday straight shot run. And he made a really impassioned speech about how important the straight shot is, and how we could do a lot more if we had an extra run per day, how they could start aligning schedules between the ferry and the straight shot, all that. And he was willing to do a lot of marketing for the straight shot, putting out Black Ball's money to market the straight shot because he felt like it was such a great opportunity for a partnership. And so that's something that I know the initiative that passed might be putting that at risk. And there might need to be some more public pressure to get Clallam Transit to understand how vital it is to run that straight shot, midday straight shot. And I'll also tell Lindsay that they discussed cost of living raises for unrepresented employees, so I got to raise the point that percentage-based raises are not equitable, and I felt like I served your position well. And then outside of committee work, I did have the opportunity just the other day to listen to an interview with Catherine Levine Einstein on the podcast called The Weeds. And she's written a book called Neighborhood Defenders, Participatory Politics in America's Housing Crisis. It was a really great interview with someone who had a really fresh take on public meetings and public participation in local politics specifically, and how the way that we structure public input often gives us results that are not representative of our entire community. And she also, I think, took great pains to not use terms like NIMBY that are often pejorative, as the title of her book is Neighborhood Defenders, because that's, I think, most people don't like to be called pejorative terms. So it's a great podcast interview, and if you wanted to read her book, that's going to be on my list for this next year, I think.
Councilmember French has provided a great example of a well-organized council report, and I'm not going to be such an example. One thing I wanted just to think about as we think about going forward in the new year with 4 new council members is looking at our strategic plan, which I know is coming up soon, and being thoughtful about whether that's the plan that works for the current council and not just the previous council. I think there's a lot of good things in there, but I want to make sure that it's something that this whole council feels ownership of and feels like that's the direction we want the city staff to be working in over the next year or longer. I did attend the homelessness task force just on the side. It's an open committee every month. And it struck to me how we look at that problem and what we do about it. Over late December, I was reading some of a report from Seattle University School of Law, a homeless rights advocacy project. It's called Penny Wise but Pound Foolish, and it's referring to how governments spend a lot of money on homelessness. I mean, we actually spend more money keeping people homeless than we would spend if people had housing. And that's because, as research has shown over the years, permanent supportive housing is a stabilizer. It allows people who are dealing with whether it's unemployment or depression or substance abuse or whatever it is, it allows stability in their lives and they're able to address those other issues. And then also, it provides that stability so that the jail or the hospital are not the places where somebody ends up when things don't go according to plan. At the kind of comment section at the end of the homelessness task force meeting today, a representative from the hospital asked, is there a place in our community for people to get discharged from the hospital who still have to have maybe intensive wound care, but not enough that they actually have to stay in short stay? Because obviously from the hospital's perspective, that would be much more affordable to get somebody out of the hospital. But as someone else pointed out, I think Amy pointed out, you can't discharge somebody who needs wound care into a tent. But so the hospital ends up keeping folks in that situation. There's examples from other cities where hospitals have saved a lot of money doing that. We as a city are potentially saving the hospital a lot with our paramedicine program, maybe other things we're doing. So it's important for us to look comprehensively at this. But when we say, well, there's not enough money to address homelessness, that's lying to ourselves, because there's if we can't afford homelessness, then we can certainly, I'm not saying that right, it actually costs more for us to have people homeless in our community. So somehow the money's not all lining up, because it's cheaper to provide permanent supportive housing for people who are experiencing chronic homelessness. That study goes into it. It kind of looks at a lot of studies that have been done over the years and synthesizes them. So I'd highly recommend that. Penny Wise but Pound Foolish from Seattle University School of Law. One of the things it pointed out was the life expectancy as a result of homelessness, and that studies on that have found that homelessness takes off several decades of a person's life. Usually the studies find at least 2 decades. So, we think about other things we're working on, like we're working on addressing smoking, for example, which is one of the most preventable causes of death there. Well, why aren't we addressing with the same urgency, with the same understanding as a society, the issues of homelessness and letting people basically have, as one of these studies said, a long-term death sentence, knowing that that condition is likely to lead them to upwards of 20 years decrease in life expectancy. So I think this is a year when we as a city are positioned to be able to move on this issue. We, as the voters of Port Angeles, passed a measure saying we're willing to pay more for affordable housing. We believe in that issue. We think that that's important. So we have the backing of the people of Port Angeles to address affordable housing. I think we have, we've spent a lot of time in the last 2 years talking about it, and I look forward to moving on it. One of the challenges there is that a lot of the things are not necessarily easy. I'm really proud of this council for adopting the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance agenda as part of our legislative agenda. I'll point out that one of those items, which is for cause eviction protection, so basically requiring a landlord to have a reason to evict somebody, that's something that the Association of Washington Cities Legislative Priority Committee was not willing to pass out, that some people felt like, well, the landlords I know would never evict somebody for no reason, so why is this a problem? So I think it's important for us to be ahead of this issue, and tonight we've shown that we are ahead of cities as a whole on recognizing this problem and what we need to do about it. So thank you to the fellow council members, and thank you to staff and the public for saying this is an issue we're going to address.
Thank you. Navarra. I first wanted to say thank you to Mike for inviting me to the Chamber of Commerce board meeting. It was really wonderful to get to see a committee that I otherwise wouldn't have, and get to learn a little bit more about the business and nonprofit community in a new way, and really hear what is important to the Chamber and all of the really amazing things that I think sometimes can go unnoticed. They do a lot of work, I think, in the backgrounds a lot of times, that being there was really nice to see. On a different note, I'm also going to talk about homelessness. My background is working for homeless shelters and doing homeless shelter administration. And when I had the privilege of going to see my family over the break, and one of the things that I did was I met with my former boss and talked to her about the really cool programs that she's doing in partnership or not partnership with their city and their county. And one of the programs that is just getting started is a partnership with the hospital, and the hospital down there is owned by the same company that OMC is owned by. And thinking through ways that we can, as a city, can leverage funding to really be able to work with key players who also have large funding sources, like the network that OMC is a part of, really to address things like wound care and discharge rates, and making sure that folks who are in need of care and who are without home are able to receive that care and not go back. And I think it's things like that were just so important to hear, and to also talk to my former boss about ways that cities can be good partners to community nonprofits, and that I think it is important that we, as a city council, take ownership, and as a city, as citizens, take ownership of the fact that homeless people are our citizens, and that we can pass the buck to the county or to the state, but they're people who are in our city who we represent, and we have a duty to make sure that they receive the same quality of life as the rest of us.
Thank you. Charlie.
All right, first off, Lindsay, we both have last names that are hard to pronounce. My last name is McCon, Wrath of Khan, if you're a Star Trek fan. I actually work right now for Clallam County PUD. I've been there for 11 years, and before that I worked for the city of Port Angeles. Always been in the electrical industry, over 40 years. Not an engineer for sure. I just been in that industry my entire life, it feels like, and utilities, distributors, contractors, and I deal mostly during the day. I'm a procurement supervisor, so I deal with a lot of contracts, purchasing. I'm also over facility maintenance for the district, so I deal with a lot of local contractors, whether it's anything that breaks in our district. I hire and sometimes fire contractors that don't seem to do a good job. So I get involved in contracts a good bit. We do have contract administrators, so I just kind of assist them. And also I'm involved in environmental compliance for the district. Not as, mostly doing the paperwork like EPA annual documents, community right to know, a lot of different aspects that we have to declare each year for as far as environmental compliance. I love the electrical industry. I've been in Port Angeles for, since 1994 when I moved up here, working for a distributor. It's called All Phase Electric, over there where the dollar store is now. The day I moved here, it was just, I never really wanted to go back home. It was just beautiful here. I'd never seen a mountain until I got to Port Angeles. Growing up in Mississippi, you know, there's a lot of flat land. It's just a beautiful place to live. You know, we have everything we could ask for here. And I love being a part of this city now, making decisions, because we're about to turn into the future of some great stuff here. We've got a lot of stuff going on downtown. It's going to be really exciting the next couple of years, and it's going to be great to be a part of it. And I'm really humbled to be up here because, you know, I didn't realize the work that was involved in campaigning, but like I told the lady out there, if you ever want to lose weight, run for an office. And the anxiety and keeping my dear wife up at night, not being able to sleep, you know, if you don't have the support to do something like this, it's really difficult. And thank you for the year of anxiety I put you through. So glad to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the next 95 meetings. So.
Sort of. All right, Brendan.
Yeah, my name is Brendan Meyer. I do new media marketing. I'm self-employed. I do new media marketing, advertising, as well as produce live media. I'm really excited to be here, and one of my big things is public outreach. Before running, I sat in here, and I think it was me and Rothstein back there, the only two people in here a couple times. But if at the end of my 4 years, this room isn't full all the time, I think that I had failed. So we've recently made a commitment in our family to ride Clallam Transit for this year when we go to swim or Walmart, you know, something a little bit further than walking distance, and to, you know, really reach out. And because there's a lot of people who aren't educated on what's going on in the city, and I think with more involvement and better educated citizens, we will have a better community. So, looking forward to it.
Thank you. I also went to the Clallam Transit Board meeting, and I think that was really the only council business I did. But so I will just say thank you again for your vote of confidence. Felt like I bumbled through that meeting a little bit, even though there were 3 items on the agenda. But I will certainly take the role seriously, and am humbled and honored that you all think that I'm the right person for the job. So I will do my best to represent you all, to run an efficient and effective meeting, and to make good quotes in the paper. That doesn't seem to be my forte, so if I might be a first call, I probably should work on that. I think with that, I will end my report and go on to City Manager report.
Madam Mayor and Council, it's a real privilege to be here tonight to welcome all the new council members. So thank you all for your commitment to the City of Port Angeles and what you've chosen to sacrifice relative to really stepping up and making things better for this community. I also want to congratulate on behalf of staff the mayor and deputy mayor for their selection for their new roles, and we're also very excited about that. I want to highlight a number of things coming up. I think on your dais, you do have an annual calendar. Know that it is full of holes right now. There's a lot of elements to be determined in the future, and I think the importance there is to recognize the fact that we do have a new majority of council at this point. We want to be really respectful of that, recognizing that there may be some changes coming up. And I want to echo what Councilmember Sherman Warren shared relative to the strategic plan. That is certainly on our radar. If this council does not want to move forward with the strategic plan as is, we want to make sure we have that discussion probably later this month. January 21st is a likely date, which we'll probably have more of a conversation about the path forward for this entire council. I want to highlight as well that next week on January 14th, from 5 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. here in council chambers, we'll have a special training on parliamentary issues from Ann McFarland. She does a great job with training throughout the state. And that's a special meeting where we're also inviting other committees to participate, such as the Planning Commission, such as the Utility Advisory Council. So it'll be a great opportunity for some learning. And then I also wanted to remind Council about the deadline to get your priority boards and commission requests in so that we can process those and incorporate those for the January 21st council meeting. On the 21st, council will be asked to actually approve the slate of assignments for those boards and commissions and committee assignments. So that's what I have this evening. Council, thank you very much for a great evening. Really appreciate it.
Just to clarify, the training with Ann McFarland on January 14th, 5 to 7:30 is open to the public.
That is correct.
And if anyone serves on the board, get your whole board there, here in this room, on the 14th from 5 to 7:30. She's an amazing presenter about procedure and how to have functional board meetings. So this isn't just for the city council and city advisory committees, but in the public, we would benefit as a community from more people hearing the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Nathan. All right, so now we come to our second public comment period. I don't know if anyone's signed up, but we'll just get started. Do we have a sign up yet? Okay, we'll just get started. So again, just 3 minutes, state your name and whether you live in the city or not.
I'm going to watch the clock this time. So I just want to thank you for including Boys and Girls Club in your legislative priorities. And as you talk about homelessness, to know that at any one day at our clubhouse, we have a handful of homeless kids. In fact, our unit director took home 4 homeless kids to stay with her, and that was a year ago, and they're still there and doing well. So we have a real commitment at the Boys and Girls Club. Also, my other hat, I serve in the Housing Authority, and so I know that there was some discussion around affordable housing. I don't know if it made it into the state legislative priorities for low-income housing to try and get rid of the sales tax on building affordable housing For housing authorities, for our authority, it would be worth millions of dollars that we could invest in other kinds of things. So I don't know if that made it, you might look and see. And lastly, I want to invite any of you anytime to come and tour our Boys and Girls Club. I left you my card, call me, and it's nice to come after 2 so you can see the chaos. But if you can't come in the afternoon, we'll take you earlier in the day. So just give me a call. It's a small facility. We can do the whole thing in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi. Hello? What'd I do? I'm Ed Chad again. We're Angeles.
It's not being recorded without the mic, sorry.
Yeah. Just carry over.
Well, it's not being recorded without the mic working.
Right, we have another mic, so we'll switch it out.
By the way, when you get a chance, replace that one light. I want to see Navarro better.
Maybe she took it out.
Thank you. Oh, okay, good.
Thanks for waiting.
Ed Chad, Port Angeles. I felt good at the first public comment seeing this new council, and I feel even better now, having gotten to know you all a little better. I think you're going to work together great. I'm really looking forward to it. I'd like to bring up a couple of things. One, on the issue of homelessness. I had a chance to talk a little bit with Councilmember Schroman Warren, did I pronounce that correctly, about the issue and about how much education needs to happen among the council. Clearly that's happening among the council and among the community as a whole. It's a lot to wrap your head around. I'd like to actually thank Ingrid Carmine for letting me fill in for her on Christmas Day at Taffy, because it gave me an opportunity to meet a number of young people in our community, local kids who are experiencing a lot of problems, homelessness, not having shelter being one of them. And Councilmember Sherman Warren and I talked about how that community education is a real challenge, because you don't want to just be acting totally as this bubble of a council. You want the community in there as part of it. And I talked with them about the idea of, I would love to see the local newspaper do a whole series on the issue of homelessness. And I'm talking about 10 articles about it over the course of time, where somebody really digs into the problem, our local problem, and shows people what's really going on. It's hard for me, I've talked to people about this. It's hard for me to absorb this stuff. At the break, I heard Councilmember Sherman Warren talking with Doc Robinson about it, and my head was spinning hearing them talk. So in the minute I have left, I want to talk about another looming problem I'd like you to at least keep in mind, and that has to do with the waterfront trail. I'm sure you're all aware that the waterfront trail currently is closed between Lees Creek and Morse Creek. I've been there a couple of times now within the last week, and it's a mess and it's a looming problem. And it's a bigger problem than that just one stretch of trail, because it's part of this massive, massive piece of infrastructure that is not only a community infrastructure, but it's a regional economic driver for our community, really important for our future. And out of the entire Discovery Trail, it is going to be the biggest long-term maintenance issue. And unfortunately, it's within the city. I'm not saying it's the city's sole responsibility, but we really have to get ahead of that problem, or it's going to get ahead of us. I'd like to just briefly suggest right now one way to limit some of your liability. Can I go over by less than a minute? Okay, thank you.
Yes, please finish your thought.
So there are two spots that are currently semi-impassable on the trail. One is a place where there's a huge pool of water. That, by the way, is indicative of probably the biggest geologic problem along that bluff area, which is that we've got really poor drainage going on. Because of that, the toe of that slope, and you know what that slope is like, is getting undermined by getting inundated with water too frequently. When the toe of a slope gets undermined, you're in trouble. That section you can get around by walking up onto the berm that's on top of the riprap. Then you get to the place where the bank has just caved in and trees have fallen down. You can get across and people are crossing, but to do it you have to walk along a tree trunk. And now that it's raining, it's a wet tree trunk that you're walking along, and people are passing by that with their bikes, carrying their bikes across this thing. It's dangerous as all get out. There is a way on the slope side of all that mess to walk around, and some people are doing that. Well, last time I walked by there, a rock about this big fell down the bluff while I was walking through there. I think as a temporary fix, it might help the liability problem to just send a couple of people down there with a chainsaw to clear out that tree mess that's in there so that people aren't having to crawl across that tree. And I don't know that I have the solution long term to what's going on there, but somebody needs to look at it long term. And as they do it, they also need to think about climate change and the implications of climate change for the long-term management of that jewel in this larger, amazing resource that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak?
Yes. Hi, I'm Matt Miller. I live here in town. I'll lead up by echoing what the last gentleman said. I'm encouraged, having watched the first meeting of this new council. I'm one of those nerds who's here 2 times a month, every month, and I am excited to see how everyone communicates and gets along with each other. It seems like a really intelligent group who cares about why they're here. And as we look outside of our community, it's easy to see people who don't have such an easy time discussing things with one another who aren't really getting an awful lot done. So beyond just smiling at y'all, I'd like to ask something of you. You know, Mr. McCon made a good point. Did I pronounce that properly? Yes, you did. And I love the fact that he knows precisely how many meetings that he's going to be here. Because having been in town 4 or 5 years now, it's been long enough to see people come and go and the council reshape itself. And I think, having said that, having expressed the faith I have in you folks, you've only got so much time together, and you really can't waste it. And it's been killing me to watch how much time has been wasted in this room over the years on just silly stuff or arguments for their own sake. So in short, I just implore you all to make the most of the time, because we really need you to as a community. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, seeing no further comment, the first meeting of this current council in 2020 is adjourned.